All right, live once again. In this live stream, I'm going to talk about um, various cult and group dynamics and break down some of these concepts in a way that will hopefully shed a lot of insight and allow us as individuals to make more informed and intelligent decisions. And most importantly, understand certain dynamics within ourselves so that we can hopefully exist a bit more harmoniously within the world because across the board as humans we're more or less social creatures, whether we find ourselves being an introvert or an extrovert, or we are in love with the way society is, or we find ourselves wanting to distance ourselves from society, even if we want to say screw it and just go live in the woods or go live in some sort of off the grid setup. The reality is the underlying dynamics, the underlying drivers, the unconscious mechanics that are within all of us as humans will still be there. So these are the things that I want to unpack over the course of this live stream, however it goes. So just from the start, understanding group behavior, whether it be cults or religions or political ideologies or really any manner of which humans organize themselves. Something that I've been studying and something I've been really interested in from really a young age. And I think maybe part of that is the fact that for myself, I've never really felt like I really belonged to any group. I always felt like an outsider. I always felt like I'm looking at it from the outside in, and which on one hand is great because I could kind of see things for what they are, or look at things maybe a little more objectively or more from the outside, obviously. But then at the same time, like I just would always wonder, like why do I not feel, the belonging, the connection, the excitement, and the all these other things that the other group members are having. And of course, I'd had times in my life where I did have, glimpses or times where I felt a part of it. And then I would say the majority is where I just didn't kind of felt like the outside of it. This has come from someone who, played lots of sports, was on many teams, was in many organizations, whether it be religious things or sports things or spiritual things or martial arts schools or internal arts schools or music kind of organizations, like many different arenas in which humans can organize themselves. And then, of course, the last 15 years, like various natural health kind of ideas, right? So, what I really started to understand from, a pretty young age is that one of the major underlying drivers and motivators for us as humans is coming from our identity and how interrelated our identity is with our family or our tribe or whatever that group that we might be interacting with, and then how those groups or those people or those members of those groups can reflect our identity back to us. And it's this kind of relationship and that kind of exchange where a lot of these mechanics that I'll start to unpack is where it's really based. And for a lot of us as humans, if we're alive, our major fear, our one of our major drivers is the fear of death. And really how that becomes real and practical is the loss of our identity. Because fear of death, fear of losing our identity are highly intertwined. And some would argue that that's ultimately what the fear of death is. Um, and that's what really drives people. This is what underlies a lot of what people are actually doing. And this is not necessarily my opinion. It also happens to be interrelated with what a lot of traditional spiritual traditions and or religions have said from the beginning, in various different ways. Obviously, there's a lot more to it. There's a lot more, a lot more than what I'm going to get into, and there's a lot more beyond my personal experience. But I'm just introducing this as a general concept and a major motivating factor. And I think a lot of people, I think, exist on the periphery of their experience, meaning there's all of these things. There's this, it's, I guess in some ways we could just use the cliche of the Freudian iceberg, right? Where there's People are existing on the very tip of their experience, but there's all of this stuff underneath it that's the actual substance and the drivers and the mechanics, but they have really no awareness about it. So they kind of live their life just in a reactive place, constantly caught up in whatever their desires or their emotions or their intellect tell them, which is all tracing back to the mechanics of their identity and reflecting certain things to them, whether positive or negative. Because the funny thing is, and maybe you've seen this in yourself, maybe you've seen it in other people. I definitely have seen it. I've seen it in myself and many other people. It's like, even if you have something that you know is wrong or harmful or dysfunctional, you kind of still would rather keep doing it because it's comfortable and it's familiar, and you don't have to go through the identity discomfort of changing, of losing all of the things that maybe prop that thing up. And I talked about that, a decade ago in terms of talking. I did a, a talk at like a weight loss thing, and I was saying how this is really oftentimes why people can't lose the weight is even though they want to, even though they try to, it's all this underlying emotional glue and the identity stuff that keeps them trapped. Because even though where they are labeling it as negative, but it's still comfortable. It's still familiar. And that in between stage of unfamiliarity, discomfort, personal growth, identity shift is sort of the piece that everyone wants to avoid, and they somehow want to get to the other end that's going to be different without doing this stuff in the middle. Why? Because it's scary, because it feels hard, because it basically, from what I'm saying, is this fear of losing the identity causes people to just typically stay stuck or do these kind of fake surrogates or these, just rearrangements of the thing over here and then act like it's a thing over here when it isn't, because the underlying mechanics are still the same. The underlying drivers are still the same. They haven't been addressed. They haven't been integrated with, they haven't been interfaced with in any real meaningful way. So whether we, hate people, whether we're like, oh, people are dumb or people are stupid, or we love people, either way, these identity mechanics, because even on the flip side, if we say, oh, people are dumb and they're stupid and I don't like them and I don't need them and I don't want to be around them and my life's better and I'm going to do my own thing, people are still reflecting your identity back to you. It's just the identity that maybe you're better than them or you're smarter than them or they don't understand you or they hurt you or some capacity. It's still a reflection back. So you still need them. You're still engaged in the same process. It just has a different set of outcomes. And on the flip side, if you're like, I love people, I need them, I love to be around them, very social, and you embrace it, same thing. It's just reflecting a different set of things back to you. And this is just kind of the the baseline, the ground that we're all working from in terms of humans. So, of course, when it comes to things like political ideology and political groups, or spiritual groups, or New Age, or self help, or even religions, a large in part, this is what is driving people, in my opinion, from what I've seen and from looking at it. So, where this is important and where this can be very helpful and a great opportunity to practice critical thought and discernment is to start to look at what is the actual thing versus what are the like 10, 20 things that are all getting lumped together under this umbrella or under this term. So it's really an exercise in starting to look at the words people say and then what they actually mean by those words, what those words actually mean for them. What are the actual emotional drivers for them? And how does that actually interfacing and relating? And to me, that is a great place for every person to start and to even finish, because it's a bit of a never-ending journey in the sense that we're always communicating and relating with other people, and identities are always reflecting back to each other. So again, for me, I think maybe certain experiences that I had as a child uh, set me up to have certain pathways just not even fire. So a lot of these group bonding and group dynamics maybe never even accessed for me or never even turned on. And we could have a conversation about sort of the various chemical imprinting stages throughout childhood. And I think maybe I skipped some of them or they just didn't fire in the right ways. And that kind of gave me a little bit of a different perspective on groups and relationships and people. And I've had to come at it from a very different approach, or at least different feeling for me and my limited subjective experience. So, as an example to kind of break some of these things down, uh, I'll talk about kind of religion and spirituality and how these things can very quickly and easily trend over to cult like dynamics. And why I'm thinking of this now is I just saw a documentary or part of a documentary about the Hillsong New York thing, which I can't remember what the guy's name. Um, I'm just trying to think of his name. What was his name? I'm trying to look it up. Well, there's Frank Houston. He's part of it. And then if you look it up, oh yeah, Carl Lentz. If you look up that guy, I was just watching a documentary about the Hillsong New York City and Carl Lentz, and it really got me thinking because I'm just watching it and I'm like, what are people really getting from this? What's really driving them? What's really motivating them? And how do all of these different things kind of just get lumped in and mixed together? Because in the simplest terms, we can look at it in three kind of ways. People are going to come at it through either pure intellectualization, abstract thought, or it's going to be strongly emotional, or it's going to be based in their base desires. So fear, fear of death, sex, power, money, these sorts of things. So as soon as you have a large group of people, it's going to be a combination of these three things. And that's pretty much all people have to relate to a subject. Why do I say that? Well, because none of us are connected to things with things within ourselves that would be considered higher. So traditionally in spiritual development systems, let's say, there's layers and there's levels and there's tiers and there's hierarchy, right? So the lowest level would be self. And for most of us, we're not even at that level yet. We're kind of still still trying to build the foundation, still trying to organize and form some kind of identity or some self that's actually functional or useful or efficient in the world. That's kind of where everyone starts because we're all human and we're all more or less coming from these same drivers. And then, there's things beyond that. There's things beyond self. Typically, those would be referred to as soul and spirit, which are distinct, separate things. Just not distinct and separate, but let's just say individual concepts and leave it at that. So, those would be things where once you bridge over to those things, now you're able to relate to the world from a place that is not based in yourself, meaning it's not based in all the base desire, emotional stuff that we as humans typically interface with the world from. There's very few people on the planet that are at these levels, and typically, when people are at these levels, they're not actually members of any organization or any structure or any ism, because they've kind of approached the actual things that the isms are trying to get them to. So then now they're in a kind of a whole different genre, a whole different world, a whole different level of existence. But what happens is in the modern time is all of us, myself included, and most of my life is you encounter information and teachings and perspectives and whatever that are referring to these other non-self, let's say, states of existence or ways of existing. But then what happens is you pull them down to your what you can relate to, what you can experience based on your prior level of understanding, your prior life experience, which is your intellect, your emotions, and your base desires. That's it. That's all we have. That's all we're interfacing with as humans the vast majority of the time. And if we weren't, then we probably wouldn't be here, and we probably wouldn't be engaging in the things that we are engaging in. And really, how systems work is to try to build people up through the layers so that they can hopefully put in the right conditions and causes to hopefully access these other things. So, with that definition in mind, and when I learned that, that actually gave me a clear sort of parameter, a clear sort of contrast to understand, well, oh, now I can see what I'm actually doing, what's actually driving me, and then start to look at the world and look at other people and other groups and see what's actually driving them and what they're actually doing. So it was kind of I'd already been on this thread of knowledge and seeking things and analysis, but I just didn't really have that contrast yet and that system and those parameters to really contextualize and put things in place. So then once I actually started to meet people and access teachings that had these things, then it kind of really put things in like, oh, here's a context, here's parameters, here's definitions, here's a structure to actually be able to organize things around to be able to move through. Which I think even saying those things would probably be controversial to a lot of people because the common sort of spiritual idea is really anti-structure, pro chaos, pro self-indulgence, pro intuition, pro subjective feelings. Basically, it's the opposite of really what every effective tradition or religion has always said. That's kind of where we are, but this is just symptomology of modern times. Um, it's funny, as I say that thing, like, 5 people just drop off the live stream. They tune in and they're like, "Oh, wait, this doesn't validate, what I'm interested in, so I'm out of here." So which is just funny, um, to see. So now we're getting down to the actual things that are actually driving people the vast majority of the time, and I just want to say that I'm not saying any of these things in any manner of derogatory or putting anyone down or saying anything is good or bad, right or wrong. I'm including myself in here because we're all human beings. And at the stage where I'm, able to bridge over to something higher than self, then I'll speak a little bit differently and I can give you a different opinion. But the fact of the matter is these are things that I think are useful to again have the clarity, have the discernment, have the definitions, have the parameters, have the structures to then be able to move forward in more of an actually empowered place from intelligence and from strength rather than just kind of whatever else people are doing. Um, so typically, what what falls under the categories and what is driving people to engage in these groups or be oftentimes hedonism, especially in modern kind of hippie cultures and hippie groups, hedonism or the pursuit of pleasure, the pursuit of what feels good. And I guess just to go back, how I arrived at this list is from years of just asking people, what does this word mean to you? Why do you do this thing? Why are you interested in this thing? What are you getting out of this thing? And it's it's an amazing thing that I notice people will push back on where it's like I'll ask them a question. If I could say, okay, I can remember I've had this exact conversation with probably 10 people. I'll say, "What does like spirituality mean to you?" And they're like, "Oh, it's just whatever feels good. It's just following my pleasure and following my joy and following my bliss and following what makes me feel good now." Oh, I say, "Oh, so hedonism? No, you're mean. You're an idiot. You're an asshole. You're critical. You're judgmental." I'm just like, "Well, no. The the definition you just gave me is hedonism." That's what I'm not saying that to be mean. I'm not saying to put that down. I'm just saying that's what that word means. And then based on what you said, that's what that is. But then that goes back to the what I was saying earlier about people reflecting various aspects of identity, and that's whole thing's a relationship. So it's that to me is kind of interesting. That's all I'll say. So hedonism is part of it, and then escapism, number two, escapism. When you really start to listen to what people are saying, listen to what is driving and motivating people about their pursuits, a lot of it is sometimes escapism. Like they hate the world, they hate the way the modern world is, so they want to escape from it. Or they don't like the way they feel, so they want to escape from it. They don't like who they are as a person, so they want to escape from it. Whether that's video games or alcohol or sex or porn or um, trance or plant medicines or any number of things can fall under this category of escapism. And how do you know that is if you talk to people and you say, why are you doing this? What are you getting out of it? What's interesting? A lot of it is temporary relief from the world or from their emotions or from some emotional thing or from some aspect of themselves, which is the definition of escapism. You're trying to escape from something. It's not necessarily saying that's good or bad, right or wrong. Depending on where a person is, that might be the best case scenario. That might be the best thing that they need to do in that moment because obviously pain sucks. Like, obviously, there are a lot of negative, or uncomfortable, bad things in the world. So, if you want to escape from it, of course, sometimes, and especially if that's your best option, if that's all you know, then there you go. I mean, but it doesn't change the fact that that's what it is. So, escapism is another big one. Um, so hedonism, escapism, and then third is another major thing, which is emotional catharsis. So this is a big modern thing, which I think you could also, I could consider it as a gradation or a flavor of hedonism and escapism because it is based on feeling something and trying to, but you can tell with the logic in it where the common idea that people have is like you have this emotional energy that's trapped and that emotional energy is making you feel bad. So if you can just untrap it and let it off, like opening a jar and releasing the fermentation or something of the pressure, then you'll feel better. Which of course in the short term, yeah, you can feel better. But the fact is you might not feel better in a long-term way. You might just feel better now. And I've met a lot of people that kind of get into that and they just get better at their emotions and they just become these hyper emotional people. And they think that's good because it's like they were when they were a kid. But in terms of being an adult and being functional and effective and strong in the world, it doesn't really seem very useful or effective to where every little thing you feel is this huge emotional thing. It's like you almost can't live in the world, which is, what do you know? A very common thing that you hear people say in when they get into spirituality is, "Oh, I can't live in the world. I can't go here. I can't go there. I can't eat these foods. I can't be around these people. I can't be in these environments. I can only exist in this very small, limited box of comfort. I can only relate to people that think, feel, and believe what I do because I can't have any degree of discord or difference in my reality," which that to me doesn't sound in any way, shape, or form as progressing in the right direction. That sounds like getting weaker, getting less functional, less capable in the world. But a lot of people do that and they wear it as a badge of honor. And they think, oh, I'm progressive now and I have all these attainments because I have all these weird interactions and experiences with things. Then they label that as psychic abilities or they label it as being a hyper or an HSP or an empath or a clairvoyant or clairaudient or all these things. It's like, well, no, probably your nervous system is just dysfunctional. And what you're describing as amazing is just a symptom of poor health. And if they actually got healthier and stronger and more capable, and then those things would probably go away. But they won't do that because of the identity and all the things that are wrapped up in it. So it becomes this, again, self-fulfilling kind of dysfunction cycle where it's like they're so interested in health, but if they actually got healthier, then it would kind of delete all the things about their identity that help them feel special and unique. So by therefore they won't do it. So they'll constantly be in like a healing journey. And that's a very common thing. And again, I'm not knocking, I'm not putting it down. I'm just saying these are descriptions, these are experiences that people are putting under these labels. So we can already start to see just a lot of variety, a lot of different things. So hedonism, escapism, emotional catharsis, and then fourth would be, I think, something that would be on the bright side, which is morality and ethics. And this would typically be more under things that are leaning a little more religious. But I think that would be a positive thing. Like humans, we need morals, we need ethics, we need parameters, we need boundaries, we need guiding principles. And I think culturally speaking, with the hippie generation, that a lot of that was undermined and unwound through, cavalier drug use, sexual promiscuity, just free love and free everything. And just it creates a lot of this awkwardness in the spiritual healing world around money, around a um, value exchange. Um, so yeah, definitely a donation thing. Oh yeah, I think I have it. I didn't. I don't really put it in the description, but I'll give it to you real quick. Actually, um, but I should maybe start including it. But also too, people can buy my products. That's a great thing to do it, but I know some people are not really that interested in taking tonic herbs. So give me 1 second and I'll give you my actual PayPal link. And I'll have to figure out a way to start putting that in the live streams. All right, there's my PayPal link. I think that'll work. Yeah. Yep. Okay. So that's a good idea. Maybe I should start doing that. I never really considered to do that since I have a company, but some people don't want to buy products or whatever. But I should start including that in there. Because the thing is, I thought about doing a Patreon, but the Patreon just starts to, or like a private membership thing, but then it just that kind of doubles my workload. And then I have to be in a position of like, okay, I create content for free on YouTube, but now I have to create different, more valuable, unique content for the private thing. But then some people are on oath on both and they get mad because like the value exchange is not proportionate. And then on the flip side, it's like if I charge $5, for a Patreon, so it's reasonable for people, and then like 10 people show up, then I feel like, okay, this isn't really worth me putting hours and hours of my time into it. So then if I want to charge $50 to where it feels a little more worth my time, then people are like, I don't know, it's kind of expensive. I don't want to do that. So then it just becomes all these layers of complexity and differences that um, I don't necessarily know if it would be super worth it at this moment, especially since I have other companies and businesses. But, anyways, there's that. So, getting back to my point or the thread of what I was saying before we got kind of interjected there was morality and ethics. I think you see this really common in the hippie healing kind of spiritual world where people get really weird about money, which is just part of the decay that came out of the hippie generation where they had good intentions, they had good ideas, I guess, but the way it all played out and manifested in terms of trying to get rid of all these structures and all of this morality and money and all these things, it just doesn't work. And it's not good for people. It's not good for society, and it just causes a lot of confusion and chaos. Like us, we could, as an example, like people, oh, time is a social construct. It's not really real. It's like, yeah, cool, but that's also not an excuse for you to be late. That's not an excuse for you to be, you know, not for you to not be punctual, for you to not be organized. It's like, yeah, a stop sign is obviously not a real thing that exists in nature. It's a human artificial construct for sure. I don't think that's inherently negative. I think it's a very useful thing that tells everyone when they come to an intersection exactly what to do, and they don't have to think about it. They don't have to analyze it. They don't have to emotionally process it. It tells everyone this is the agreement, this is the parameter, and this is the social contract. Cool. But you have people who somehow think all those things are inherently negative. So then what that ends up doing is just weakening them and making them less effective as individuals in the world. But somehow they feel cool or different because they're like, oh, I don't know. Anyways, I've been there. I'm not knocking. I'm just getting back to the point of morality and ethics, how this can oftentimes be what is put under the label of religion or spirituality, which I think is actually a very useful thing. Having morality, having ethics, having parameters is great. Also, another good thing which tends to drive is community. So we have hedonism, escapism, emotional catharsis, morality, ethics, and then community. And oftentimes, this is what drives people. Like, if you ask people, why are you going to this church, or why are you doing this spiritual thing, or why do you go to this music festival, or why are you doing this? For a lot of people, it's just the driver of community, which is basically a whole very important thing, a very important thing for us as humans. And then I guess number six, sometimes another thing that gets lumped in is like personal development, um, especially with the Hillsong thing and the documentary I was watching, and a lot of modern kind of church things and modern religious things. It's always including some kind of personal development element where it's like, um, even if it's a really generic, basic thing, it's still something that people really. It's a it can be a very positive thing for us because we want to feel like we're growing and developing and becoming better as humans, of course. Um, and then another major thing that gets lumped in is self-help and healing. Um, and then I'm just going to go through these because I actually don't feel like breaking down each one in massive detail. Um, so I've said hedonism, escapism, emotional catharsis, morality, ethics, community, personal development, self-help or healing, and then a sense of salvationism, a sense of collectivism, and then a sense of inspiration or getting creative energy or feeling like really inspired. And then to flip back to something a bit negative, obviously self-hatred and flagellation is something that really drives a lot of people and is really mixed in with these kinds of groups. Um, So again, I'm not saying I'm for or against any of these things or that they're good or bad, right or wrong. It really just depends. And actually, some of these things I'm really for, I'm really in support of because it's obvious we are humans. Well, actually, I shouldn't say that it is obvious. I think, personally speaking, it's important that we understand as humans that we need some degree of social organization. We need some degree of social harmony, and we as humans need some sense of community. We need to have some moral frameworks, some ethical map. And I think it's beneficial for us to exist in some kind of hierarchy where hierarchy, I kind of mean someone that's above us, that's maybe more skilled or more experienced or more powerful or more um, powerful to chart a loaded word, but more skillful than us, and then someone that's below us that we can help and assist and look out for and care for. And basically, so that on one hand, we're kind of kept humble and, we're kind of kept in check and we don't start to feel so great about ourselves because we have a contrast of someone who's maybe more skilled or more intelligent or more knowledgeable or more wise than us. And then on the flip side, we have someone maybe who's below us that we can help, we can assist, we can try to inspire, we can look out for them, we can protect them, we can help them along that way. And humans existing in kind of that hierarchy can be very useful, can be very beneficial. Obviously, of course, there's a lot of ways it can go negative. There's a lot of ways it can get exploited and perverted and turn into something that is absolutely not good for people in any way, shape, or form. But that doesn't mean the ism or the hierarchy or the system is inherently bad. It's really comes down to the people. And there are times where the system is bad, the ism is bad, and the teachings are just wrong. But again, that comes down to discernment to be able to understand and make sense of the things. So that comes back to the whole point of why I'm making the video is if we can understand individually within ourselves these mechanics that drive us, then once we are able to see them, We can understand groups and see people and see leaders and see teachers and see the world through these metrics, through these drivers, through these motivators, and then be able to see what is hitting what is getting activated, and then from there be able to discern, is this benevolent or is it malevolent? Is it leading me in a good direction or is it leading me in a bad direction? Is it based on exploitation and making someone else feel big by making someone else feel small, or is it based in actually you know something else? So it's just, you can only do that through having the understanding of the parameters and having an understanding of the mechanics. If all of those things are invisible, if all of those things are completely unknown, the likelihood of exploitation is quite a lot higher. And at the same time, sometimes even sometimes even the awareness can still lead to the exploitation. I can think of the Fire Festival guy. If you haven't heard of Fire Festival, look it up. Um, Basically, the Fire Festival guy just got out of prison and he's already working on Firefest 2, and he's already selling out tickets. So it just goes to show that people can even know and they can get duped, they can get hosed, they can get fooled and completely see someone and know that someone is a complete charlatan and then still fall for it again. And that's just human nature. I don't know if there's a fix for that yet, but that's just how we seem to do. So I'm just recapping that and trying to come at this in a different way to illustrate of what really drives us, regardless of what group we in, or group that we are in, or regardless of what label we have for ourselves. These tribal emotional identity drivers and our abstract intellectualization and our base desires are fundamentally what is driving and motivating our behavior. And mostly what people are doing, myself included, and many others, is just, it's like, if I need to feel good or special, then I'm gonna go and you know go in this particular direction and try to use these kinds of labels. Well, why do I like those labels? Because inherent in those labels is the fact that I'm better or smarter or in on some insider knowledge that other people aren't getting. So it's automatically sets up a contrast in a hierarchy. And most every group that I've seen will have some degree of that. I mean, that's the fundamental basis of our political discourse in America now, unfortunately, and well, it has been for quite a while, is that you're knowing yourself based on, you belong to this group, and everyone that doesn't belong to the group is somehow inferior. And this is something that I've been making videos about for a long time, because if we look at, just as an example, and I'll break this down and give you examples and unpack it. So historically, if we look at times in history where a group that was in power labeled another group as less than and dehumanized them, they created this us versus them mentality. And then let's say they acted out atrocities or violence or oppression or discrimination upon that group, uh, which I'm sure you can fill in the blanks and find many examples of that throughout history. But then when I meet people now in modern times who say they are against that thing, morally opposed, they would never do that. But then I hear them speak, I look at their behavior, and they're engaged in the exact same mechanics, the exact same dynamics. It just hasn't yet reached that outcome yet, because maybe they don't have the power, maybe the power hasn't been consolidated yet, and maybe they're still in a position of dealing with the consequences of their negative actions. Because the thing is, it's really easy to make a moral stance when you have no real skin in the game, right? But then let's say you become in a position of power where it's consolidated to such a degree that you almost become immune to the consequences, at least maybe for a really long time. Then let's see what the actual moral category is. And I guess as a, just to switch gears, like, I'm pretty sure in America, as an example, in terms of COVID, like, we were probably a few weeks away from a lot of people being like, you know what, if they don't want to get vaxxed, just round them up, get them out of here. We were tiptoeing on those lines. And even with a lot of the other, ideologies that the media was hitting up, it was just stimulating these drivers and these mechanics within people to where people arrive at a highly prejudiced, biased position where, like I'm on the West Coast, so I can give an example of a lot of left leaning people that let's say are against prejudice and bias, but are actually massively prejudiced and biased, but they don't see it or realize it because they're clouded by their emotional fixation on this virtue or this ideology. But my point has been for, I don't know, 10 or 12 years at this point, is that the mechanics are the same. The underlying drivers are the same. It's just the outcomes haven't yet maybe reached certain huge historical high watermarks, but it's the same mechanics, the same dynamics, the same drivers, which, in the right conditions could possibly reach those things, which is like oddly enough, what a lot of people on the left are doing is, accusing people on the right of, being fascist and of wanting to get rid of democracy and get rid of personal rights and get rid of personal freedom and get rid of free speech. When in actuality, that's the exact behavior that they are engaged in. Because at least from what I've seen, a lot of people leaning left are replaced morality, replaced family values, replaced personal responsibility, replaced individuality with loyalty to a party and loyalty to an ideology and mostly loyalty to corporations at the end of the day. When you look at the actual outcomes from in terms of what's happened, in terms of more power consolidating in the hands of fewer individuals. But I think that's just illustrates a lot of what I'm saying in kind of an egregious way. And how it's able to occur is through the mechanics that I've just explained over the last 40 minutes. And again, these are things that I've been thinking about since I was a kid. And it wasn't until I got, a bit older, had more life experience, and then also encountered, various traditions and practices to actually provide the framework and the contrast points and the reference points to be able to see things a little more accurately for what they are. Um, so yeah, let me just recap my. Yeah, so I say these things because I think it's very easy, and it's a trap that I fell into for a lot of my life is feeling angry, feeling isolated or bitter or judgmental or fill in the blanks of like liver cheese stagnation, um, and then kind of having a lot of negative sentiment towards these groups. Uh, Whereas I think, at least where I'm at now, and I think it's a little more useful and practical to understand these underlying emotional drivers because they're within all of us, and then be able to understand and analyze our own behavior, our own motivators. Maybe only for the fact that if you if you think you're doing this thing over here that's taking you there, and then you realize, actually, I'm doing this and I want to go here. If you're going this way, you're never probably going to end up going this way. Or if you do, it's going to take you a lot more time, energy, money, whatever. So if you can arrive back at a place of realizing this is what I'm actually doing, this is what's actually motivating me, this is what I actually want. Oh, I can hopefully do this a little more efficiently and effectively. And as it pertains to like spiritual endeavors, could be hedonism, escapism, emotional catharsis, a sense of community or personal development or self-help, self-healing or salvationism or sense of collectivism or any other few other fill in the blanks that I went over earlier. So that's why I made the video. That's why I think it's useful. And there's things in myself that I have reflected on and still do reflect on. And when I encounter situations, is trying to understand for myself what's actually behind this, what's the actual motivator, what's the actual driver, what do I actually want, what's the actual solution at a fundamental level. And for me, that just makes a lot more sense. So that's what I have for this video. That's the outline. That's all written down. So if there's any questions, I'll answer questions for a few minutes. Otherwise, I'll wrap and leave it here. It's funny though, the time difference for the live stream versus how much time actually goes on is not, they're not one to one. Like it says I've done 45 minutes, but I'm pretty sure I've been on here for like an hour in actual time. It's weird. Um, Off topic, what brand do you recommend for milky oat tops, and do you think you'll ever sell it? I don't. I'll have to look. Actually, if you can send me an Instagram DM on Instagram or an email through my website, I can look through my emails and see what I have there. Because I can't think of anything off the top of my head. Because I don't know if I ever really found one solid thing. Because it is kind of it's partially a bit of a seasonal product, I think, and it's not really that popular or common. And I thought about selling it, but at the same time, it would just take a lot of work. Meaning, I'd have to source the milky oat tops, and then find someone to make a tincture for me, and then the margins on it probably wouldn't be that great, and it would be basically the same product as what a lot of other people are selling. So I don't know, but maybe I'll look into it, because you really, for that one, I think a tincture is the way to go because of just the nature of what it is and getting it fresh. But I think it's cool, and I felt a difference when I took it, but I haven't taken it in a while. But maybe I'll get back on it again and see how it goes. Maybe that will re-inspire me. But anyways, if there's any other questions, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, I'll probably jump off and go eat breakfast/lunch. Also, someone asked for like a donation link for my PayPal. Um, so I left that in the chat in case people want to take a look at it. You have said that you don't think emotions are relevant, but are not emotions part of being human being? Well, I think so. Let's say this as an example. Let's say you went to the doctor and you were going to get a surgery, right? And you walked in for your pre-op like conversation with the surgeon, and that dude or the person, male or female, whatever, was like screaming at the top of their lungs, berating their employee with like spit flying out. Or you walked in and they were just bawling their face off. Would you feel very comfortable for that person to want to operate on you? Or like, let's say you walked in to like talk to your CPA and the same thing was happening. Or let's say you were going to go to the gym and you were going to try to do your record PR deadlift, and you wanted to do that when you're just like crying and bawling and super sad. That's probably not going to help you accomplish that. Of course, on the flip side, maybe being super angry and amped up might give you the motivation to do it, but it's also, you're probably not going to succeed from that place. So that's kind of illustrating my point in terms of what I was trying to get at about irrelevancy, in terms of emotions. But emotions are, of course, part of human being, and they're part of life. But it kind of comes down to understanding what emotions are. And usually it ties into what I was saying earlier. It comes back to various aspects of our identity, which is usually based in memory. Because I don't know if you've noticed this, but as we become older, and we become adults, we tend to feel less emotions. We tend to have less emotions because we experience less of life. So the thing is that if all you have are emotions and you relate to the world emotionally, and then someone says emotions aren't relevant, that's a very difficult, challenging thing to really wrap your head around. But the fact is, if you look at the teachings of like basically every tradition, they tend to value equanimity. They tend to value neutrality, calmness, being at ease, being at peace. And those are all completely contraindicated from being emotional, because being emotional is different than an underlying feeling quality that is in your system. Emotions are different than mental qualities. Emotions are different than actual qualities of your personality. The problem is that we live in a hyper emotional, sexualized world. So all of our reference points are very distorted, and people tend to base their identity around one emotion over the other and then create a lopsided character. And then that just tends to be like what people respond to because it's stimulating. So, personally speaking, I say emotions aren't quite as relevant because I'm interested in trying to develop personally and trying to be more efficient and effective in the world and trying to develop towards spirituality. But if you have different goals, then emotions are completely amazing and fine, and who cares? Like, because that, I guess that's an important distinction. Like, if someone is not interested in spirituality or personal development and growth and, becoming the things that I talked about, then everything I'm saying doesn't matter, because those are the underlying axioms or assumptions or beliefs of what I'm saying. Those are my presuppositions. Those are my goals. Those are my intentions. Those are my motivating factors. So people can have different motivating factors, different intentions, different goals, different axioms, different assumptions, and that's fine. Neither of us are good or bad, right or wrong. It's just relative to our underlying worldview and our underlying shared experience, if that makes sense. So that's why I said what I said. And of course, yeah, having emotions is part of being a human, but I could take it a bit further as well. Because sometimes people think having a conscience is the same thing as being emotional. Um, and that guilt and shame are emotions, but also too, nowadays people want to get rid of them. People want to demonize them, when actuality, guilt and shame are very useful. And I think, societally speaking, a lot of people could use a lot more guilt and shame because of just degenerate behavior that is becoming more and more normalized in the world, and becoming more and more socially acceptable. And people are moving further away from their conscience. So I think, emotional indulgence tends to make people more childish and more ineffective in the world, following their whims, following their flights of fantasy, following their base desires, and just going in an opposite path of development that I think is really that useful and effective. But again, that's just my opinion based on my experience and based on my goals and the things that I've been taught. So hopefully that adds some clarity and answers your question. I'm happy to share more or answer more if that didn't do a good enough job. Um, but yeah, McGee videos said there's nothing wrong with emotions, but logic should steer emotions instead of the other way around. Yeah, I mean, I think that's also just part of being an adult. Because children just follow their feelings and their emotions. So it's like, do you want to be like a child? Do you want to be like an adult? Um, but again, it comes down to discernment. Emotions aren't necessarily the same things as feelings, and feelings aren't the same things as mental qualities or underlying states in your nervous system, or even your conscience. So I think when you denigrate emotions or put emotions down, people automatically assume repression, suppression, you know, or like being a sociopath or all these other negative things. And it's like, that oftentimes says more about them as a person, because that's the first thing their mind goes to. Whereas when I think of less emotions, I think of calm, neutrality. I think of being more use to the people around you. I think of being a more positive effect in the world, because you're more calm, level headed, you're less reactive. So you're actually stronger because you're less emotional, because people don't hurt you as much. They can say things to you. You can tolerate more. You can deal with more. That's what I think when I think about having less emotions. So both of those things can be true. I think it just depends, and it is a commentary on that person and their belief system and their life experience. And I just think sometimes people get it all kind of mixed around. But again, that's kind of the point of the video is illustrating questions and points and parameters for people to engage within self-reflection, and choose their own adventure. The question is, do you ever watch dating podcasts like Whatever Podcast or Fresh and Fit? And how do you feel about that form of entertainment? Um, I think large in part they're pretty disgusting and kind of pathetic and gross. It's like Jerry Springer. Jerry Springer's like inbred child descendants, multiple generations. It's just emotional grifting for people, mostly men that are really had negative experiences with women. I would say that's the majority of it. I've also seen conversations that Fresh and Fit had about politics or world events where I thought, oh, okay, they're actually intelligent and coming at this logically. So, but the Whatever podcast just seems just almost like exploitative in a way, like almost pornographic. Because on one hand, you have, from what I've seen, you'll have like a clinically trained psychologist trying to have a conversation with like an 18, 19-year-old OnlyFans girl who has like such a limited life experience, such a like an inability to. It would almost be like if you if you just took a team of NBA players and were like had them play basketball against like a group of sixth graders. It kind of looks like that. So then it's like, why are people doing it for one? Well, I mean, I know why they're doing it: money and clicks and attention and base desires, cool. But then why are people watching it? Well, from the same reason, but it just doesn't appeal to me, doesn't attract to me. And I think it's one of those things where it just people watch it because they have a pre-existing belief, and then that reaffirms their belief and then just sets them down, usually more of a life of feeling isolated and angry and upset. So usually it's men that feel isolated. They watch it and then it affirms their motivation for isolation, and then that's it. So then what's going to be the outcome of that? Angry, prejudiced men, feeling angry and isolated. That doesn't strike me as a great outcome. But on the flip side, I think it's just a reaction to the fact that so many women have been doing the same thing and obviously are still doing the same thing. There's just as many, humiliation porn. It's basically humiliation porn, is what it is. Um, there's just as many humiliation porn for girls, finding clips of guys doing something and then just humiliating them on the internet and ripping them to shreds on the internet. Um, and then other women being like, yeah, exactly. Men are trash. So I think it's a pretty disgusting social trend. I feel bad for the people engaged in it. I hope things change. I hope people actually can improve themselves and not get sucked into those rabbit holes, because I think it's a net negative thing. But at the same time, people are making a lot of money off of it. So it's unlikely that it will change anytime soon. But it also is pretty relevant to everything that I have been talking about in this live stream so far. So, yeah, those are my thoughts on those things. Um, Pitiful, I guess, is the right word for that. It's very pitiful, meaning lots of pity to be had for the people engaged within those things. But I mean, I can see why. There are a lot of people treating people very poorly, men and women. So then what's the outcome typically? Oh, every member of this group must be this way. Or I had 3 experiences like that were like this, so every member of this group must be this way. What is that? That's prejudice. And then, oh, well, I'm better than them because I belong to this group. What is that? Bigotry. Great. We're creating a society of more prejudiced bigots. Cool. Like, I don't know if that's really the thing we want. And it's just getting more entrenched because people, they get into their gender little boxes, then they get into their political little boxes, and then they just become more prejudiced and bigoted individuals. And I don't really think that's great, personally speaking. That doesn't really strike me as a useful outcome that's helping people be healthier and helping them have a positive impact on the world and be able to show up more positively in their world, which I think this goes back to the question earlier about, oh, you said emotions aren't relevant, or, said more negative things about emotions. But then look at what the examples we just talked about. We have these people just that are super emotional because this is why they're watching Fresh and Fit, or why they're doing whatever podcast, or why they're doing all the feminist things as well, because they're hyper emotional. They're super into their emotions, and it's massively distorting their experience. It's massively undermining their critical, rational thought processes and turning them into a prejudiced, bigoted individual. So, you really think that's a great thing? Do you think the people in the trad movement actually understand the old-fashioned Western traditions they try to uphold? I don't know. I can't speak for everyone in there. I also don't know what the old-fashioned traditional or the Western traditions were, because the fact of the matter is they're not Western traditions. Pretty much most every functional society is organized in more or less the same way with some variations. I'm not going to break down that in extreme detail because then it's a whole other thing. But I think it's a predictable outcome. If things go to this extreme, what's going to be the response? Go to that extreme. People are getting super whatever anti-traditional. So then what's the solution? Oh, let's be traditional. Which maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. Sometimes people under Sometimes people try to understand the letter of the law and not the spirit of the law, and vice versa. But I think again, it comes down to people, because it's not like things were perfect in traditional societies, and it's not like things are perfect now. So I think people maybe need to look at the world that they live in now and try to make the best of it. And I think that's what a lot of people are trying to do, is these things kind of sort of worked in the past. So let's try to do that, which the thing is, if it works for people and they're happy, then more power to them. And I think it goes back to what I was saying a lot in this live stream and previous ones, talking about social harmony and how we need that, and how it is an important aspect. And I think honestly, if I were to put on my tinfoil hat, I think more or less what we are seeing now, at least in America, is corporations and or private philanthropists, let's put it that way, injecting a lot of money into our society to destabilize it, to erode the fabrics. And there's a pretty overt effort to erode everything that was traditional and every structure that we had, whether that's gender or race or sexual identity or the family unit or even economic status. All of these things, I think there's an active financial interest to erode them. Why? Probably to just privatize it, to consolidate more power, control, wealth, and resources in the hands of a smaller group of individuals. Why do I say that? Well, it's pretty undeniable that's exactly what has occurred over the last 3 or 4 years. So people might scoff and say I'm conspiracy theorist or whatever, or I'm just describing what happened. On one hand, we had all these fabrics and all these structures start to break down, and all this chaos and disorder on one hand, yet on the other hand, massive profits, massive gains on a small set of individuals and corporations, and having more overreach, more influence, more control over our lives, to whereas the individual is becoming disempowered and undermined at really every turn. So I'm not necessarily, am I being conspiratorial or am I just describing from a certain point of view what has literally occurred, at least in America, over the last few years? But again, it kind of goes back to the same people where I asked them their definition of spirituality, and they said, what feels good, following my pleasure, following my bliss, following my joy. And I said, oh, hedonism. And they said, oh, no, that's not hedonism. You're an asshole. So it's like, wait, we live in a world where I'm ostracized or demonized or cut down by just accurately describing what people say and what they do. That makes me an evil, demonized person. So then what does that say about the world? What does it say about those people? Um, that's just something that I've wrestled with. I mean, I understand it, but it's just kind of an entertaining and really kind of tragic, sad dynamic a lot of the time. But it also tends to occur on both sides of the political spectrum, not just the left, but also the right as well. But I just think we're living in a time where, because there's a decent chunk of human history where the right wing extremists, let's say like the neocons, more so were steering the ship, and we're engaging in a lot of geopolitical events for their own personal gain. Whereas I think now it's the other side of the coin where we have far left, or whether they even care, whether they even are in that ideology, or they're just using it for political and social gain. Who knows? But that just to me seems like what's occurred. And I think how I could summarize my experience so far as a human being growing up in America. On one hand, you have, well, okay, as a general rule, the ruling political elite class doesn't give two shits about us. We are peasants, we are serfs living in serfdom. However, we happen to be the most abundant free serfs and peasants so far that we know about. Both of them are going to exploit us and take advantage of us and manipulate us for their own gain, basically speaking, on a larger scale. Obviously, on small, like local political scale, it's a very different thing. But I'm saying on a large scale, the difference that I could see as on the right, it seems like yes, they're going to exploit us and take advantage of us and do all the things that they do, but it seems like at least some of that benefited Americans, either in a global sense with like the function of the petrodollar and how that propped us up and propped our economy up and things, to where at least the dollar had a certain amount of power. And then, um, but then actually now that I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking of Nixon taking us off the gold standard in the 70s, and that's a whole other thing. But then, so on the flip side, it feels like the the left is more so selling us out for more global anti-American interest, whether that's China or Russia or whoever's behind it, or even something beyond politics. I don't know. I'm just saying that in the dumbest, most mundane, kind of tongue-in-cheek joke sort of way, that's how I kind of summed up American politics. It's like right-wing people are selling us out and maybe polluting the environment or doing God knows what, and corporate cronyism and all this kind of things. And but maybe some of that trickles down and might sort of help Americans, or at least try to promote American values, whatever those are. But on the flip side, the other one's completely anti all of those things and just undermining it. And that's just based on looking at, my life over the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and now, and how things have played out and how things have kind of whatever. But also, I think just obviously on a geopolitical scale, things are much more complicated than a lot of us can understand. And many situations are a lot more complicated than we can understand. And our typical political discourse is just hyper emotionally motivated and not, or most of us are not intelligent enough to, or we just don't have the literal processing power to take into account all these hundreds of variables to arrive at an understanding of a situation. which is maybe why these groups want to create an AI to basically rule the world. Where amazing, amazing how that works. Where it's like they're like atheists and anti-God, but they want to create like an AI synthetic God. So it's just funny how the whole thing kind of comes full circle. But anyways, that was just kind of a tinfoil conspiracy theory, hyper, hyperbolic, conjecture kind of rant. But anyways, that's all I had on my. Actually, that wasn't even on my outline. I just don't even remember how I got on that fucking subject. But anyways, that's all I have for today. Thanks for tuning in. If you tuned in late, I highly recommend going back and checking out everything that I said, because the meat of everything I said was just about the first 40 minutes. And then the last 20 minutes, 30 minutes was just me rambling and waffling. So, anyways, thanks again for tuning in. And oh, yeah, I did put a PayPal, whatever donation thing in the chat box again because James mentioned it. So if anyone wants to do that, go for it. I feel weird asking for donations. I've never done it before. I've been YouTubing for 15, no, 13, 14 years at this point. I've never done it. So it was the first day. There's a first time for everything. So anyways, thanks again for tuning in. If you have requests for topics in the future, or you have questions you'd like me to go over, feel free to drop them in the comments and I'll definitely cover them. So anyways, thanks for tuning in. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day and I'll talk to you soon.